Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This will not be the normal garden question and answer video that I normally do. I usually stand in front of something pretty and then I shoot the entire video, but we're actually going to jump around this morning. We're at Letchworth State Park in New York, and I'm on the edge of, I don't know, it's way up. I don't even think the camera will be able to really show how far up we are. There's a little walking bridge way over there where you can cross over. We're going to be seeing some waterfalls this morning. We were on a hike, and I said, well, let's go ahead and shoot the Q&A while we're in this beautiful state park in New York. We've been crisscrossing New York all over the place. We've been to the state fair. That was just a weird coincidence. We happened to be going through Syracuse during the New York State Fair, and went to that. So this is the last day for the Learn to Garden video series sale. I had actually done it through September 1st. So if you're still interested in getting the $50 off the Learn to Garden video series, that's available through today as you're watching this on Sunday. And there's always a link below with some sort of discount for subscribers if you're watching the videos. So if you're interested in buying it later, there's still some discount, just not $50. I got a question a couple weeks ago about the garden plants with Jim Putnam channel, and whether we were going to do any more on it. And I've just kind of come to the conclusion that I think I'm going to merge it back with the HortTube with Jim Putnam channel. So we're going to take the 72 videos that are on the garden plants channel and move them over here, and then we're going to start building it out again. So yes, the garden plants thing videos are going to continue. I'm just going to do them on this one channel and not have to think about managing two channels in any way, shape, or form. It's just going to be easier for us overall. We are going to have them in the same kind of playlist that we had them over on the garden plants channel. So if a plant, let's say a plant is a flowering shrub that grows in zone 5 and it, is evergreen. Not many of those, but that's something. It'll be in a playlist that's like that for zone 5 evergreen shrubs. So that's the way we're going to do it when we bring them back over, and we're starting to shoot some more for that. So excited about that, and just kind of merging the two channels together. That's coming. The videos for this week, we put up a video from Ladue Topiary Gardens, and Steph had visited there several times as a kid. And we went back there, we did some filming there. I put up one more of the tour videos from the house. They're in a playlist if you want to catch up with all. If you want to learn about the 400 plus plants that are in the Raleigh garden, there's, that was video 15 the other day. There's 18 total. So by the time I'm finished, if you can go through and every single plant that's in that garden, I've just kind of gone into detail on how they've performed in the garden, successes, failures, all those kinds of things. You can go back through that entire playlist. And then there's a tour from North Creek. As I'm filming this on Friday, the North Creek video is publishing on Saturday morning from North Creek Nursery with Steve and Arden. And I hope you've watched that video. I really love that nursery. I had toured it 4 years ago. Just all the things they have going on at that nursery are just unbelievable. And we have one more video we shot there just on 10 perennials that tend to show off in the late summer and early fall. So that video is coming as well, probably this next week. And one other thing, and then we're going to start walking and answering gardening questions, okay, is that we're going to do a live Q&A at some point in the next couple of weeks. So be aware of that. I'll put up some sort of post on the channel that you'll get for when that's going to happen, but we are going to find a place somewhere as we're actually heading into Canada. We're going to find a place somewhere with a nice backdrop and do a live Q&A for the first time ever. I've never done one, and you guys will just ask questions as we go. Just to let you know, I don't know the answer to every question, so don't get frustrated with me if if you're asking a question and I'm skipping it in some way as we're going. I'll tell you the ones that I do and don't know. Sometimes I don't want to guess at things. And so, this format that we're doing today gives me the opportunity to go through your questions from last week and go, hey, that's a timely question for right now. And I know the answer to it. And I don't have to make up stuff, because I don't want to ever make up anything on this channel. This park is called the Grand Canyon of the East, and you can absolutely see why. It's 100 feet above my head and probably almost an equal drop. This is the bridge that we could see in the distance from that original start, and this is the lower falls up above me here. So, okay, gardening questions. And Steph wanted me to point out that most of the time I do know the answers to the questions, or there's also, you know, some familiarity where you're removed from something in some way, but it's familiar to something we have. Those are kind of questions that I tend to avoid as well. I can make educated guesses on some things, but I just don't want to do that. Horticulture is just like, there's always an exception. And I've said that many times on the videos. You know, you say something and then there's some exception to it because there's one that grows in the desert or there's one that grows whatever. Okay, jumping into questions. Are plants susceptible to high UV index? This one got asked a couple of weeks ago. I had written it down and somehow skipped it last week. At a certain point. Okay, so I've talked about a lot of times plants being, and of course I don't have a plant behind me in all the videos. I normally have a plant behind me. I've talked about leaves being solar panels, really, and they collect the sun's energy and, you know, breathe in air, separate the oxygen out and breathe and return that back out into the atmosphere for us to breathe. They take in the carbon and turn that sun and that carbon into sugars, and so they thrive on sunlight up to a certain point. So it depends on where the plant came from. There's actually a point where plants are probably benefited from additional UV rays, and then a decline in it. So that, you know, that it just depends on the plant, the location you're living in, and that kind of thing. But it can benefit them to a certain amount, and then yes, there's a point where, just like us, the UV index, you know, the sun becomes too much for our skin, too much for their cells, too much for that green coloration they have. The size of the leaf is going to matter with that. A lot of factors. So yes, it can have a negative impact. A lot of that's going to depend on the plant, where it is, the type of, you know, the type amount of water that's in the soil, all kinds of things. But yeah, you're probably going to get more leaf scorch with high UV indexes, especially if you've had any drought stress or additional stresses on those plants beforehand. Okay, somebody's adding to a mixed screen area. How close to existing plants can they put wood chips? You know, existing well-established plants, you can probably use wood chips as mulch. Not real thick. Don't put it this thick and don't pile it up on the trunks of your existing plants, but you can use it as a regular kind of mulch. Where wood chips aren't the best mulch really is when we have newer plants. Herbaceous perennials don't necessarily thrive in it quite as much until it breaks down some. So there's some exceptions to this, but if you have established screening plants, you can just use wood chips as actual mulch, just a regular thin veneer, not 8 inches. And then how soon can they plant new plants in those wood chips? Well, if you're planting woody shrubs, hardy things, larger things that you use for a screen, I don't think you'd have to wait, as long as, again, you're not we're not talking about the deep mulch method of starting a garden here. We're talking about the, you know, just mulching. You can just pull that stuff back, plant your plants, and then just have a thin layer coming back toward the plants, and don't put it up on the trunks, and you'll be absolutely fine just planting in it immediately. We'll do one more here and then we'll move on or change angles here. Opinion on pruning blueberries in the summertime. Really, they're best done in the winter time. And one of the reasons I wanted to point this out, two things. You probably want to look up a video, maybe from one of the extension agents or university sites on YouTube, where they do some pruning of blueberries in the wintertime, so you can see it, or maybe a blueberry farm that's done some pruning, so you can see how harsh they actually are on fruit plants. Steph and I are lucky enough to be able to travel some, and we're in upstate New York right now. And what they do to apple trees, you know, up here, you know, on Espalier apple trees that, you know, have as many apples as they have leaves, basically. They're highly manipulated. We see this everywhere. You see pecans growing in Arizona, and they're highly, highly manipulated plants. Same thing with blueberries. To get the most production out of them, you do need to do some pruning on them. Summer's probably not the best time. It's best when they're dormant during the fall. And I would look up how to do this, because it's typically taking out the oldest canes and not allowing them to become too woody. The canes that are coming up out of the ground that are 2 to 3 years old, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 years old, are going to be the best producing canes. One thing, when we turned it off there, Steph did point out that I do have a series of blueberry videos on the channel. So anything from how to plant them, how to grow them. I do teach pruning in that series of videos. Probably not on the, if you have a lot of blueberries, you may want to refer to, you know, some university pruning videos, but I do have a series of blueberry videos. You want all the basics of blueberries, picking the right blueberry for your area, that kind of thing. And then let's see. Okay, so this is a tricky little question here. This was the way the question was phrased is a 50-plus-year-old woman concerned about the difficulty of digging out 8-year-old plants. And then she saw us dig out the snow joey viburnum at the house and transplant it, and then got the idea that it's time to remove some Eleagnus, viburnum, several different viburnum, Carlisii, Mohawk, Birkwood, a Philadelphia, Weigela. They're on her foundation, they're too large. Wants to move them out to the edge of the property. Always a good idea. Lots of consultations I do are people somebody moved into a new house, and I can see the plants that were planted on their foundation are already, they were the least expensive plant that the landscaper could find when they went to buy plants, and they put ligustrum on your foundation and your windows are this high. And so you're gonna spend the next 20 years of your life battling that, or just go ahead while you can, while they're still small, get them out to the edge of the property and screen or dispose of them, whatever you want to do, whatever the particular plant is. But frequently, plants that get too large planted on foundations. So, you know, this question is a bit tricky because obviously, I don't know. What you need to do is go out there and try to root prune them, and you could root prune them now to move them later, and just get a feel for how hard this is going to be. A lot of this is going to be your soil type. A lot of this is going to be, you know, if we're being honest, a lot of 50-year-olds are built different. I'm on a trail right now in this park, and we'll have at some point a 70-year-old person run past us on one of these trails. And you just go, how are they doing that? So, you know, we all age a little differently, and we all have different physical strengths. Once something's in the ground for 8 years, I don't care who you are, there's going to be some difficulty in getting those things out of the ground and moved. So what I would do is just test it. You know, go out, try to cut the roots on them. If you feel like you've gotten around them and you've cut the roots pretty easily, you can probably move to the next step later on this late winter, early spring, February, March of next year, and get the things out of the ground and move them and probably be successful with it. You know, having cut the roots, and maybe you'll cut them back again a little bit at the same time. Regardless of flower time and all that kind of stuff, you probably do need to prune them if you're moving large things with less roots on them than they had. And if it doesn't work out, this is probably a job you need to hire someone. This is, you know, there are jobs, and as a landscaper, those were the jobs I was hired for. I mean, I worked for years and years and years, and you get the everything landscape where I'd go in and do the entire project, top to bottom, the hardscaping, the planting, every single detail of the thing. Then I'd get the jobs that were just clearly, these are the things I can't do. And so you do them. And so that, you know, different reasons people are going to hire landscapers. This may be a reason to hire one for you after you've kind of tested whether or not, get out there and just see if you can cut the roots. If you can get that far, you probably could get the rest of it done. What do you look for in a good arborist? They have 8 to 12 trees that need work. Just like anything else, you know, it's going to be different, you know, in different areas of the country, you know, how well trained folks are going to be, and just calling themselves an arborist, or, you know, having some training. You know, Bartlett has an arboretum in Charlotte, and, you know, puts a lot of effort into training, you know, and then there's other companies that are that way as well. There's another one that's escaping my mind, and when I'm editing this, I will, I'll put it on the screen, that I always see at all of the, when I'm somewhere learning something, they tend to have people in the room, so I'm always impressed by them. And so a lot of it's just, are they doing continuing education? Because that matters, because we are seeing tree diseases evolve, tree, you know, insect issues evolving. We're seeing, you know, issues firing off pretty quick. And so we definitely want people who are staying up to date on those issues in time. And then reviews, hopefully you get someone to recommend somebody. That's always the best way, right? To find a neighbor who's used somebody and they can recommend them, and they seemed knowledgeable in some way. Somebody asked if black mulch is bad. Does it cause problems because it absorbs heat? I would say almost 100% yes. I have seen And I obviously, you know, I've done no study of this. I haven't done any side-by-side comparisons, but most of the time when I see areas of black mulch where plants are planted in the proper distance type of planting, you know, where the plant gets 4 feet wide, so I'm going to put them 4 feet apart. I've talked all about the fact that we planted our garden much thicker than that. A lot of information about that in the tour videos. A lot of reasons to plant plants closer than they ultimately grow over the course of 20 years, because they're going to struggle with their roots getting hot during that period of time that it takes them to get to that width. So there's a lot of reasons not to do this, but if you're going to plant things the proper distances apart for future growth, then I've seen black plants really struggling in black mulch conditions. So I don't use it. A lot of people do. I see it all over the place. We heard of an HOA that actually recommends it, or you have to use it, but it's not something we're using. One of the things we've really enjoyed about going through the state of New York is doing a little bit of botanizing as we've gone. We've seen this beautiful blue lobelia all over the state, and it's just in full bloom as we're here. This one's a little shorter than some of the others that we've seen along the way. And of course, the Solidago, just in full flower. Got a whole field of it behind me. Probably can't hear the waterfall. It's just over here to my side. There's several, I saw a couple of asters back there that have started showing some color as well. There's some milkweed, actually some common milkweed to the side of the path, and had aphids on it, as you can see from the sooty mold that's on it.
Sweet autumn clematis.
And then there's some, unfortunately, a little bit of sweet autumn clematis in here, you know, which is an invasive that we've talked about before around in and around our neighborhood in Raleigh, but that thing's unleashed out in the world, and here it is. It's not like anybody can come into the state parks and pull it out, or the federal parks and pull it out. Let's see. Somebody said in Australia it's recommended to plant peonies with lime, but we don't seem to do that. They tend to like limes. Steph's laughing because I said limes. You're definitely not planting with limes. Lime. When we were younger, working at a garden center, it was always recommended when we sold people peonies to sell them lime. Our pH in the Raleigh area is typically around 5.5. Maybe a hair more than that, depending on where you are, or a hair less than that, depending on where you are. So they like a more neutral pH, so we would sell people lime for this. I just have decided sometime way back when I got into soil science more, that I just wasn't going to try to adjust my soil for anything. I'm going to plant things. Now, they don't thrive in my soil. My highly amended soil, because I am adding compost, using wood chips to create compost, it's highly amended. But if it doesn't work in that situation, off with their heads. And I have found in our 5.8 pH soil in Raleigh that our peonies have zero problems. They grow perfectly fine. As fine as peonies want to be in zone 8A in Raleigh, and we've probably been more like in zone 9 for the last 10 years in our winters. So I just don't, but that is the recommendation if you have very acidic soil, is to use some lime when you plant your peonies. I don't want, one of the things I want to point out on this channel is if I don't want to do a lot of soil manipulation. I feel like we're in upstate New York right now. We're from Raleigh. We spend a lot of time in Florida. We go out west a lot. All of those places have beautiful things that we can use from either those spaces or non-invasive things from other places around the world that are similar to those spaces, and we'll enjoy our soils, highly amended, again, soils, without trying to be soil scientists to the point of trying to manipulate our soil like that. That's all I'm saying. Somebody has a dried out smoke tree, but they're afraid to overwater it now because I've talked about that's the time we tend to overwater things, is after they've gone through some problem where we didn't water them, and then we panic water them, and now we're overwatering them. How can they safely revive it? You just have to stick your finger in there, and if it's moist, leave it alone. Make sure the pot's up above the ground. This was in a container. If it's planted, same thing. Just put your finger down there, see if it needs water. As we get into the fall, the nighttime temperatures, we saw them yesterday. We were at Highland Lake in Rochester, which Olmsted designed park from a long, long time ago, obviously. Incredible tree collection, but they had a whole smoke tree section there, they were already starting to go dormant up here a little bit. They still had a little bit of the color on them, but they were getting that leaf color in them here in late August. For us, it's much later than that, but as we get into fall and they slow down, you're just not gonna have to give them very much at all. So definitely don't be panic watering them in the fall. They're not gonna be able to use it. They've gone past the point of really using water. Just keep it moist. If it's in a container, get it off the ground, make sure it's draining well. So that's the things I'd point out on it. But yes, it's very easy to panic water when things start to go wrong, and that's the time we actually end up overwatering. There's actual mist in the air now from the waterfall that's behind us. Let's see. And I think you can see the rock wall that's on the other side of it. These perennials, these herbaceous perennials are amazing to me. There's Joe Pye weed and Solidago and other things just growing right out of the rocks on the edge of this cliff. This is an absolute cliff down here below us. And that Joe Pye weed's just thriving there. It just has finished. It's almost bloomed out. There's still a few flowers on it. I can see just mist all around us. I don't think you'll be able to see. Somebody has a dwarf loropetalum that's not thriving because a hot lip salvia and a lantana are thriving and they're covering it. When can the loropetalum be moved in Durham? Despite the fact that Durham just got moved into Zone 8, I still would consider Durham Zone 7B. And for me, loropetalum is one of those things in Zone 7 that can get hurt some winters. And so that's not a plant that I'm gonna move right now. I'm gonna move that. I'm gonna move the loropetalum in the late winter, early spring, maybe around the 1st of April, mid-March to mid-April, somewhere in that window. One of the reasons I wanted to write this question down, or have Steph actually wrote this question down, was because be careful not to let your herbaceous perennials and annuals and other things damage your permanent pieces. You know, that loropetalum is going to be with you for a long time. Is the lantana or the hot lip salvia? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I would definitely lean toward cutting those things off of it to keep it in good shape until it's the appropriate time to move it, which for me, again, would be the end of winter. We just did a massive climb from that area that we were down below where that lower fall is. Up and up and up and up and up. It's a bit dry up here, we're noticing. You know, we kind of got our drought broken although apparently it's dry again at the house right now, but we had a significant amount of rain from that tropical storm that we got almost lucky. We were in Connecticut when it came through there, and it was causing flooding damage there. And so in my mind, I was thinking the rest of this trip, we were actually going to see areas where they had had more normal rainfall this year, but it's not true at all. We've had the corn up here is almost finished, but really, really struggling for water. I think these farmers would like to have a few rains, and up here on this ridge, we can really see where some of the plants are hoping for water at some point. We've seen the Canadian hemlocks kind of struggling in a lot of places we've been. We've done a lot of hiking, a lot of biking on this trip, and we've seen areas where they're doing okay, and then areas where they just really seem to be struggling right this minute. So let's get some more questions here. Somebody has a 4-foot tall single leader crepe myrtle. They're in zone 7A, 7B with no suckers. Seems to thrive in their area, and we just left crepe myrtles. What was the most northern crepe myrtle we saw? It was well up into New York. We of course saw them around Fairfield. We saw lots of them in New York City. There's 2 videos from New York City coming, and there were lots in there, but we saw some in Fairfield, right, in Connecticut, and maybe a hair north of there. We saw maybe 1 or 2 more, pretty far up here. I think if you'd planted them in the last few years where it's been warmer, they're probably doing better, but definitely in 7A, 7B, you're not gonna have a problem with them typically. They want it to be multi-trunk, and how to do that. The way I grew crepe myrtles at my nursery is we would start rooted cuttings that were 2-3 inches tall, and then we would grow them super close together in gallon pots until they were about this tall, and then we would cut them to the pot like 4 inches tall, and that caused them to sucker. And then we would cut them down to the 3, 4, 5 trunks, whatever we wanted. We could of course grow them as standards too, as a single trunk like that, if we wanted to. So that's the only way, is to really cut it. Some people are going to be screaming, no, don't start the suckering, because once you start the suckering, the multiple trunks coming up, you may end up with lots of multiple trunks that you're going to end up cutting off of it. So I'll leave that up to you, but that is in fact the way to get them to create multiple suckers, is to cut them off. And that's the way we did them. We forced them for a while to grow competitively with one another, so they stretched big and tall, filled out the root system in the pot, and then bam, off with their heads. And then we got the multi-trunks, and they were fast growing at that point because they were on that full 1 gallon root system. At that point, we could bump them up to a 3 gallon real quick, finish them in a season. Well, 2 seasons total from a rooted cutting. They grow so fast. So somebody has summer sun scorch in southwest France, and I'm assuming this person with the UV index question also has sun scorch on their plants. And they're in southwestern France. It's been dry. They have west-facing cryptomeria, pittosporum, junipers, a lot of things we grow in our area in Raleigh that are scorched. Should they cut off the damage as the weather cools? I'm going to leave that up to you. I mean, I almost consider some of that scorched material to be protective, possibly through the winter months, and maybe do it more toward the time where they're going to start to regrow in the spring. I'm probably not going to want to uncover it for the winter. I don't know what, I'm assuming in southwest France you're not getting that cold, but for me, I'm probably going to wait till late winter and assume that material that's on it will offer me some protection to the plant in some way or another. When I see it starting to show signs of growing, especially like the cryptomeria is going to be right out of the gate, February, probably starting to show signs of growth. The pittosporum and the juniper too early, pittosporum a little later. That's when I would do my pruning on them at that point. Somebody has read that Rosa Sharon are problematic, and that they spread all over the place. Are they safe to use in their Charlotte garden? Well, first of all, there are new varieties of Rosa Sharon that are either low seed count or seed free. And so you can now jump in the Rosa Sharon game if you want to safely. We are up in the Rosa Sharon land. We saw one, we were riding our bikes in Seneca Falls and rode past a house that, it wasn't Seneca Falls, it was the town before that. Huh? Waterloo. We were in Waterloo, New York, and riding our bikes near downtown, and I saw this Rosa Sharon that was so full of flowers it looked like a crepe myrtle. I had to stop. I was like, is that a crepe myrtle all the way up here? It wasn't. It was a Rosa Sharon, but the flowers were presenting on the top like a crepe myrtle. And they're just everywhere up here, and they seem to thrive a little better up here. I think that vernalization in the winter, the cooler nighttime temperatures, the more dormancy it's getting, they thrive a little more up here, bloom out a little more, and they're still blooming heavily right now up here at the end of August. As you're watching this, September, and down our way, they've definitely burned out a bit. But you can buy them now. Up here, they don't seem to be invasive. I haven't seen one anywhere that had seeded itself. I don't know if the winter is controlling. These are old varieties here. They're definitely ones that would have seeded themselves. In our area, they are definitely invasive. And so this is one of those things. Somebody's invasive plant is another person's wonderful ornamental plant. That happens a lot of times. Canadian hemlock forest behind us, probably 250-foot drop behind Steph back there. She's a good ways away from it, but it is a serious cliff down there below. She just put her hand on her side like I'm pointing out how close she is to the edge. Let's see. This person's in zone 7 in the North Carolina mountains. They don't want a fruiting plant, but they want an espalier plant along a fence that has some sun, part shade, shade exposures. What can they use? Pretty much anything you'd want to use that's hardy in your area that will grow in those conditions can be espaliered. I mean, virtually anything. I mean, we see, back when I worked at the garden center as a kid, the things that would come in most often espaliered were always magnolias. You can use evergreen magnolia in zone 7, depending on how the wind exposure. Mountains can have wind exposure that could be an issue on an evergreen magnolia, but definitely magnolias, deciduous magnolias, just as good of a candidate. Definitely can use camellias. Again, that's going to depend on the wind somewhat. Cotoneaster we see being used as espalier, different varieties of cotoneaster for that. Some are very ground hugging, others can be grown more upright and are easy to espalier. They make good fences too because they get a little thorny inside, and so they can help with your fence be more of a fence, right? And then I would just I would stick with things that have woody trunks. So as an example, that camellia, magnolia, like I just said, that have woody trunks, and not things that have runners. So when I say anything can be, you can use a forsythia for this, but the forsythia is then going to colonize and start to have trunks out. As you manipulate something that has a tendency to colonize, you know, like a lot of our native plants, Clethra, Itea, non-native forsythia, and native weigela, and those kinds of things that tend to colonize like this, when you're manipulating something like this, they're going to have a tendency to sucker more, right? The more you cut on it up here, the more likely it is to sucker. So avoid suckering plants. You can use a holly. Most holly, you know, you could go to some nursery and buy some really gnarly old Nellie Stevens hollies that they've had for too long, and turn them into and espalier them against that fence. There's all kinds of things you can use. But again, I would stick with something that's less likely to colonize. One more in this spot. If you were to replace an old school redbud with a newer cultivar, what would you choose? And then they mentioned Hearts of Fire, which is that new one that's really, really very vivid, from Jackson Nursery. That thing is a really beautiful plant. Carolina Sweetheart, Lavender Twist, any of those. You know, all of these things have a lot of hybrid vigor in them, and I've talked about a lot of them, you know, needing to be slowed down a bit when you plant them to thicken up the trunks, you know, so make sure you're either buying one that's a little more sturdy already or being prepared to slow it down a little bit. Our Golden Falls is going to be staked forever. I've mentioned it a few times, and you know, if you watch the tour videos, it's in the upcoming one next. I talk about that life with that Golden Falls Redbud in one of the upcoming videos, perhaps this week. I don't know if it's the next tour video or the one after that. But that thing grows so fast. It's got some hybrid vigor in it, and they just grow so fast that what we've seen in our travels is a lot of them having broken branches, thin spaces in them where I can tell something's broken out of them. Some issues, you know, that I think they need to just be pruned a little bit more and thickened up a bit. And if I was going to replace an old school redbud with something, I might today, if I was making this decision and I had the space for it to really grow, I might use forest pansy or one of the ones that's a few, you know, a couple decades old that are just overall more sturdy plants that I can lean on. If I've got that kind of space that I want to put in a great larger growing ornamental tree, or know that you're going to have to put a little bit of work into these, I think, in order to keep them from damaging themselves. And I hate to say that because I love these things and I get more redbud questions than I get about anything. It's just the more experience I have with these things, the more of these newer ones with all this hybrid vigor. By hybrid vigor, I mean they're interspecies hybrids and they grow really quickly. Our Golden Falls Redbud, we cut it up off the ground 3 times a season. And I guarantee you right now it's on the ground probably this wide across the ground. The thing just grows like, if you added all that growth up in a year, it's probably 6, 7, 8 feet of growth every season that thing is growing to its own demise, because it really just doesn't have the structure to kind of hold that up without, you know, us slowing it down to let it catch up. Made it up quite a bit higher. You can see the stone wall out in the distance there. The upper falls are around this corner up here, so we're anticipating that. The other thing we see lots of out here are these red pines, and you can certainly see why they're called red pines. This bark has this beautiful red color on them. I can pick them out from distance anywhere in here. You can see the red in the bark, and some of them are quite brave. This is a hundreds of foot drop, you know, like 6 feet that way. These pines are growing right on the edge of the cliff. It's just kind of that was a seed that has regrets, maybe. I don't know. Next question. This person is confused on how to site marginal plants. They've got multiple ideas about, they hear protected, you know, they need a protected space. They need to avoid afternoon sun. They keep out of the winter wind. Some things can be near a house, but not other things you don't want near a house. And they're a bit of a plant collector, and we're wondering, you know, where to place certain things. So the only time I use the house for wind protection on something like Fatsia for sure. I keep it out of the winter wind because it can desiccate. So things with large leaves, I'll use the house, and I'm not worried about them spring flowering too early, and so the house is a good good place to grow things. Sometimes we just don't have a place to grow something. So let's say you are growing something that flowers super early in the season and you're trying to winter protect it, but you're also hoping that it flowers. If you put that up against the house is going to potentially keep too much heat on it, and it's going to leaf out earlier or bloom earlier than it normally would, and then it becomes frost sensitive. So the frost being different than the wind protection that the house provides. So sometimes we just don't necessarily have the perfect place for a plant. We definitely want to, again, any large leafy evergreen that's marginal in your area needs to be out of the winter wind. That's just for sure, 100%. That needs to be the case on those. And then afternoon sun, you know, in the south is kind of hard to avoid if you don't have trees, you know, to actually use, you know, to avoid that sunlight. I don't mind. We have some shade things in our garden that are getting some midday sun. They're getting 2-3 hours of midday sun. But again, backing up earlier in the video, I have them planted a little closer together than other people would, and it's helping protect their roots. And so they're tolerating that midday sun a little bit better. And, you know, they're in the morning shade and the afternoon shade, and kind of opposite of what we would normally think about shade plants. But it works out fine when they're packed in a little bit tighter. But yes, I feel your pain, and it is hard to find sometimes the exact right space to grow something. But typically these types of problems, this is what I'm going to throw out, the types of problems where you're going to get a little sunburn on something, or you're going to get a small amount of winter damage. Again, if you put something out on the edge of your property that's a leafy evergreen and the wind hits it all winter, it may be dead. So let's avoid that one. But if it gets a minor amount of damage on it in the space you put it, it doesn't have enough quite as much color as it should in its foliage, so you know it's not getting as much sun, or it stretched a bit. It bloomed a little early and made it more frost, you know, more frost sensitive. All of those problems aren't the things that kill plants. And so you have an opportunity to go and move things and adjust for things. And we've done that around our garden. You know, if you go to the new house playlist on it and you start at the beginning, you'll see there's been plants on basically a merry-go-round in that garden that have moved around as we've searched for and found better and better spaces to grow them. Somebody wants to transplant an osmanthus that's in too much shade. It's 4 years old, it's never flowered. They're in zone 8A, Tennessee. Is sun from 12 to 5 too much? No, it shouldn't be, especially if you transplant it, you know, with the osmanthus. I know you're in 8A, Tennessee, but I would treat that as 7B probably. So I'm gonna move that osmanthus in the late winter, early spring, and it'll have time to adapt through the spring as it gets hotter and the sun is up higher in the sky and that kind of thing. So, you know, sometime on the other side of the worst of the winter, but early enough that it has time to make that adjustment into the sun. And you may get a little burn on it. I might cut that back a little bit. It's never bloomed anyway, so it ain't gonna cause you any problems. When you root prune it now, move it late winter, prune it a bit as you're moving it. It's probably ideal. What is the difference between pine bark mulch and hardwood mulch? I could actually do this right here, couldn't I, Steph? If they're a pine, I've come to a spot. I just, in the last clip, talked about pines, red pines, and there's not one here where I'm standing. But so hardwood mulch is just off a hardwood tree. Pine bark mulch is off a pine tree. The pine bark mulch tends to be a bit more like cork and last a long time. Most plants that you're going to purchase in a container, other than like annuals and maybe some perennials, which might be in a peat mix or a compost mix, most plants you buy are going to be in a pine bark or some sort of conifer bark material. It doesn't shrink down as much in time. It really just doesn't break down all that much. That's why it makes such good material mixing into clay soil, because it stays in that form for a long time and allows water to pass through it. Makes for great material like that. I don't like to use pine bark mulch all that much as my top mulch, and mainly because it floats. And if you have a garden where things can get floaty, you know, if you've got any kind of slope at all, you know, any kind of pine bark mulch, pine bark mini chips, pine bark nuggets, all those things, they tend to be a little floaty, a little less well behaved in our garden beds, where the hardwood mulch tends to wrap together. It tends to be a little more stringy type of material, and it locks together really well and forms a mat that tends to be a little more resistant to wash away and a little better weed prevention probably because it is matted down. So, you know, that's the main difference. They're all two different types of trees and they function a little differently in the landscape as we use them as mulch. I'm gonna answer one more here before we move on. We at a spot that says end of trail because we just came to look under this bridge right here. We just went past the middle fall. There were a lot of people over there, so we didn't film anything over there, but you can see video of that middle fall, which is like right here. And we're heading up to the upper fall is where we're going. Do we cut back the Brigadoon St. John's wort during this late summer, thinking it would have time to flush back out there in North Georgia? I wouldn't want things flushing right now. So I'm gonna kind of avoid right here as September 1st, as you guys are watching this, cutting things back because that may make them try to leaf back out and grow some. I think you're gonna be much better off. We cut our Brigadoon back every year and we cut it back in February, March-ish, sometime in there. And you can run a lawnmower over it if you want to, if you've got a big enough patch. Lawnmower will work fine. We just shear it off. Typically just leave it right there in place unless it's big chunks and then we'll throw it on the compost pile. But I would wait till later in the year. Sometimes pruning things can stimulate growth. We definitely don't want to be stimulating growth right now. Plus you gotta, it does look good in the fall too. It picks up some colors, you know, as it goes through the winter as well.
So we're on our way back down from the Upper Falls. It's an amazing place. I can't even halfway recommend enough. So it's kind of funny. I love dogs. We met a lovely little cattle dog that I asked permission to pet, and he met me with a lot of vigor, which was fun for me. But anyway, it's pretty cool. And another thing I wanted to talk about really quickly was a quick thanks to a gentleman that'll never know that I'm thanking him, but we were in Highland Park in Rochester, and he motioned through the window of the van and asked us if we were traveling around, and then wholeheartedly recommended that we go to the Grand Canyon of the East right here. So I will wholeheartedly recommend it as well. One question I'm going to answer is someone asked if the filming of last week's question and answer occurred at my sister's house, and it did. I have 3 sisters. One's in Delaware, one's in Maryland, and one's in Connecticut. And while we were in Connecticut, we filmed in my sister Jennifer's house. It's a beautiful landscape, but it's an interesting landscape. We can never go visit it in the spring because we've got all of our own stuff to do in the spring in our yard, but her landscape, it's got a great mix of conifers and deciduous plants and evergreen, broadleaf evergreens. But some of them, it's been there long enough where I'd love to get there in the spring and give her some serious recommendations about doing some rejuvenational pruning. So maybe if we get there one spring, we can come back the next year and do an amazing video talking about all the wonderful plants that she's got there. But yes, it's at her house, and yes, it's a beautiful landscape.
Absolutely incredible place. We got to film at this morning. That Lower Falls is down here below the camera that Steph has on. We've made it back down to the bottom. And I'll answer one last question for this week. A couple other things. Again, this is the last week for the $50 off Learn to Garden video series sale. The last day. If you want to take advantage of that, it's code August. Ask gardening questions down below this video, and we will pick from those for next week. We actually probably are sitting on about 15 good questions that you guys asked from last week that we haven't answered in this one, that we may have a midweek question and answer. And if we get enough this week, we may just turn this into 2 videos. Again, I'm also going to do a live Q&A at some point, so maybe save a couple good questions for that as well when we do the live Q&A. What else? I think that's it. Well, just one more question here. Are we planning on doing any lighting in the garden? And the answer is yes, but I've talked about it in the past. I think the night belongs to the night. So I would personally never put any up lighting on my plants that stays on overnight, or any kind of outdoor lighting that affects the insects in any way. We have too many street lights as it is. I'd like to put the street light out that's on us, honestly, right now. I mean, I wish the city did not have a light right outside of in between us and the neighbor, as I just don't like it. But we're gonna string some lights from the porch back to each corner, one to the shed and one to the other side. We've already purchased those. I just haven't had time to put them up yet. And so we'll have lights out there. So if we have guests over, you know, we can have it lit. When we're on the screen porch, the back garden can be lit, that kind of thing, but we will shut it down before bed, and so that it's not lit, because a lot of these nighttime insects, you know, do enjoy. There was a question about that too. I'll put it in the next Q&A about things being pollinated at night. So that'll be in an upcoming Q&A. Thank you guys so much for watching, so much for following along, and we'll see you next Sunday for sure.